let Mr. Modi speak for what his own policies will be in Afghanistan.
Thank you, ma'am.
Yeah, let's go to Ukraine.
On Ukraine, Russia, you probably saw President Putin's comments today. In which he said, we will treat the choice of the Ukrainian people with respect. Is that your reading that he's going, what is your reading from that? He also says that he wants better ties with the West. I mean, there were mixed messages in that speech, but overall, did you get a better sense?
A good way to put it. Well, look, on the first question, we would welcome Russian acknowledgement and acceptance of the election results, which are, the elections preparing to move forward on the 25th. In a vast majority of the country, they're ready to have them. And where it's been challenging, the Ukrainian government's working to do the best they can to still allow people to vote. But at the same time, we would encourage Russia to use its influence with separatists, to urge them to cease their violent activities and lay down their arms. I mean, we've seen, particularly in a couple of places in the east, these separatists trying purposefully to disrupt the elections with violence, taking over of government buildings, taking, ballot boxes, taking voter registration lists. So if they will recognize the results of the election, that's a good thing, but they need to call on their the separatists that they have influence with to not try to disrupt the elections. You kind of can't have it both ways.
So it wasn't enough to satisfy you that he's...
Well, no, I mean, I did say that if they acknowledge and accept the results of the election, that would be a good thing. And your second question was?
Well, actually, can I have another follow-up on this one? The one is regarding a pullback. Russia says it's pulling back equipment from the border. Today, the Russian military general staff said it will take about 20 days to move the military equipment temporarily deployed near the border. Have you seen any signs? Are you more convinced that that is taking place?
Well, we have seen some movement, but it's too early to know where or how many of these forces are actually moving out for good. And regardless of, I think, what people would call sort of initial movement or initial stirrings, the force that remains on the border is very large and very capable and remains in a very coercive position and posture. So, we've seen some signs, but again, this force amass is just so great that they really need to take steps a little quicker.
Marie, you spoke about the separatists. Do you have any doubt that they are not completely under the control of the Russians?
Well, I don't think I ever said they were completely under the control of the Russian government. I said that the Russian government should use its influence with these separatist groups to encourage them to stop the violence, get out of the government buildings they've occupied. We know the Russian government has influence, and we believe that it should use it. On Ukraine?
Yes, please.
You on Ukraine too?
Yeah.
Okay, then I'll go back.
It's about the follow-up to her question that Putin actually also said some comments on President Obama. Have you got any reaction to that?
I didn't hear those. What did he say about the president? I actually didn't hear them. I didn't hear the ones about President Obama.
He called her, and anyways, so.
Okay. I'm sorry, I really didn't see them.
I have one on.
Wait, hold on. He had one on Ukraine too.
Ukraine?
Yeah.
Yes, You said that you are concerned about the possibility of disruption of the elections. What other concerns do you have about the process itself? I mean, it's like the participation, the number of the participants, or all these things.
Well, I would again note that in a vast majority of Ukraine, preparations are on track. A vast majority of Ukraine is quite frankly calm. So this is a very small portion, and particularly in two cities in the east, where separatists have kidnapped poll workers, they've threatened poll workers, they've stolen official documents, and the Ukrainian government is working on alternative solutions to make sure people can vote in these areas. So again, I would reiterate that it's a very, very small number, and I actually have a number here. I think there are 213 district election commissions nationwide. Does not include Crimea. Obviously, that's a little bit different circumstance. And according to the Central Election Commission, only 18 of these commissions have been unable to complete much of their prep work because they're in these two cities where the separatists have really tried to disrupt them. So that is a very small number. Would reiterate how most of Ukraine, a vast majority of it, is really ready for these elections.
My second question is regarding the outcome of the election. First, do you have any concern about the outcome of the election?
What do you mean
I mean,
about the
who
outcome?
is coming up, who is coming down? I mean, it's with the outcome.
Well, we certainly will support who the Ukrainian people, working with who the Ukrainian people choose.
And the other question related, do you believe that this new election, the outcome of the election, is going to change the reality on the ground or not?
Well, we certainly hope that it
Or what
does.
is going to add to the reality on the ground?
Well, look, I think the Ukrainian people standing up and choosing their leaders will show very clearly to Russia and to the rest of the world that they get to pick their future. That what Russia has tried to do goes against basic international norms, international law, and that there's nothing more powerful than people standing up and choosing their leaders. And that's why this is such an important election for the people of Ukraine. That's why we need to get a government in there and keep moving forward to hopefully get in a better place.
A couple things on this.
Yeah.
One, if you're willing to support and work with whoever the people of Ukraine choose, and if it's true that there's nothing more powerful than the people of their own country, I mean, they did have an election and they elected a president who was then toppled.
Well, he fled.
Well, he was
He packed
ousted.
up and left in the middle of
Whether
the night. He fled. Yeah.
The circumstances of his departure are not really, I don't know if they're germane to this discussion. The point is that the people of Ukraine did vote and it did elect him.
And then, well, but there was also a process by which he was removed from power.
Right.
That's part of their
Okay.
own internal
So-
political process. So that was done through their political process.
Okay, so so again, you would reject the idea that President Putin again raised today that there was a coup.
Absolutely.
Are you so sure that this election is going to be free and fair and credible that you are prepared to say now that you're going to respect the results, whatever they are?
I said we'll work with whoever the Ukrainian people decide. We'll look at what happens. As I said, though, preparations have taken place. There are an unprecedented number of monitors across the country here.
Yep.
So obviously, we know they've put a lot of effort into making these elections go forward.
Right, but you can't predict now with 100%
I can't predict what will happen.
certainty
No.
that this election is not going to be problematic.
Well, I don't have indications that it will be.
Right.
So I don't
But-
want to give the impression that I do.
Right, but
We know that there are separatists trying to disrupt the election,
Right.
particularly in parts of the East. That's a huge concern for us. But one of the reasons I noted this vast majority of the country that's calm, that people aren't trying to disrupt it, where people are going to go to the ballot box on the 25th
Right.
and pick their next leader.
right, but if you can say with certainty that if they, meaning the Russians, acknowledge and accept the results of elections, that would be a good thing.
Yeah.
That would seem to suggest that you already believe, or already are pretty sure, or already are 100% sure that everything is going to be everything's going to be hunky-dory and fine.
I didn't
No?
say hunky-dory and fine.
Well,
not when we've seen
but
the
there's
kind of violence we've seen
how
against
about-
poll workers, but that again, 100% certainty, that's ridiculous to say.
right.
But what I have said is that, look, Ukraine is ready for this election. There are people trying to disrupt it. The Ukrainian government is trying to take steps to make sure those people in those small areas can vote. But Ukraine is ready for this. There are going to be monitors there. They've set up polling stations. You know, a vast majority of the country, they're ready for it.
Okay,
That's what I can say.
all
Is
right.
there anything that could happen that would dissuade you from recognizing this thing as a fair?
I don't
what do you
even
expect?
want to venture to guess
Right,
about
but you
that.
know, the supposition or the assumption that you seem to be making is that the Ukrainians are going to go to the polls. They're going to elect they're going to vote for a candidate who is pro-Western.
I'm
shall
not
we
making
say.
that assumption. I'm saying
Well-
that what we've always said is we don't support one person or one party or one
Okay.
candidate. We support the process and the Ukrainian people,
Right.
not us, not the Russians, no one else picking their leader.
And so once again, I just want to make sure you reject the idea that the process that drove or that ousted or removed Yanukovych, that
The
was a
process where
legitimate
members
process.
of his own party
that
voted
was
to remove
a
him from
legitimate
power.
okay.
I reject
All right.
that notion.
Gotcha.
Yes.
Okay. One more. This is a follow-up to this question about these journalists
Uh-huh.
that are detained. This morning, the State Department hosted a Google Plus hangout on the election, and this subject was raised. And one of the participants in it, who is a woman who is affiliated with a pro-democracy group in Kiev,
Okay.
rejected the notion that these people are legitimate journalists, which is something that you guys have at least raised questions about. I don't know if you've made a decision or not, but she called them information terrorists. I didn't
see the hangout.
Okay.
Sorry.
She called them information terrorists and suggested that they weren't reporting news, that they were intentionally distorting and lying and giving it a 100% wrong impression in the Russian media about what was going on. And I'm just wondering if you agree with that assessment.
I don't think I would use the term that she used,
okay,
to be fair. But what we have said about these two journalists who are still detained is that they had fake journalist credentials and they had weapons in the trunk of their car.
You're now sure of that? Because before it was reports that...
It's reports, yeah. I mean, I don't have any evidence to the contrary. We're still looking into all the details, to be clear.
Okay, do you know if the Ukrainian authorities have gotten back to you on your request? I'm operating under the assumption that, based on what Jen has said earlier, that you talked to the Ukrainians and said, look, if these guys are legitimate journalists, you should let them go. Is that correct?
Absolutely.
But do you know if...
I think that we called on them to investigate it. I don't know if we've gotten an update from them on this. But again, I don't think when most of you work overseas, you carry man pads in your trunk. But separately, on the second part of your question, not specifically on these journalists, but we have seen an incredible amount of propaganda. We've talked about it a lot. The secretary's mentioned it. We've talked about it here. I'm not talking about these two journalists because I don't know the details there, but it has been a concern.
Right.
Absolutely. But we don't think people should be thrown in jail for it.
You don't think people should be thrown in jail for
propaganda? Now, again, we've asked them to look into this case. If they're legitimate journalists, they should be let go.
But again, then you mentioned just a little while ago that they were found with with weapons in their trunk. You're 100% sure that's the case?
I didn't say you're all about percentages today.
Well, I mean,
that's the report we received. Again,
right.
we're still looking for the Ukrainian government to investigate it. I don't think we have 100% on all the facts yet. If it turns out that they were legitimate journalists, we've said they should be released.
Okay, and then just the last one on this is this fake press pass idea for fake credentials. I mean, these were credentials that were issued by
the Donetsk People's Republic,
right? Which you say doesn't exist. But you know, reporters in a lot of different war zone situations have to get passes from various militia, various whoever.
That's true.
And that doesn't necessarily mean the credential is fake. I mean, the Donetsk People's Republic, whether you recognize it or not, believes that that these are legitimate credentials. Well, I don't know. But
right. I mean that's.
But you know, look, in Beirut there were militias. You know, there were neighborhood militias that you had to have a safe.
I understand, but I don't think those reporters in Beirut had man pads in their trunk.
Well, I don't.
Maybe.
So there again, you just said that they had man pads in their trunk.
I know. I said I don't think reporters in Beirut did.
Right, but that means that. But then you suggest that these ones did.
Yes, we said
I don't know if they did or not, but you're saying that it's a fact that they did.
The point on this is, yes, they had credentials that appeared to be fake, and I understand how when journalists are operating in dangerous places, there are different credentials. I totally understand that. I'm not sure that's what we're talking about here. That's why we've asked for more facts.
All right. Okay, and you, as far as you know, you haven't gotten them yet.
That's my understanding. I'll see if there's an update.
Okay, thank you.
Oh, wait.
Staying on Ukraine.
Okay, staying on Ukraine. Yeah.
So I didn't want to, use my memory.
Now you're going to read.
In an interview in St. Petersburg, he was asked about that President Obama is saying that he is lying about Russian involvement in Ukraine, and he said, "Who is he to judge?" And that if he wants to be a judge, why doesn't he find a job in a court or something like that? So, do you have any reaction to that?
Well, first I would say that as the leader of the United States, he cares very deeply about international law and international norms. That's a big part of his job. As the leader of this country, as our commander-in-chief, as someone who goes to the UN General Assembly every fall and talks to the rest of the countries in the world about how we all live up to our obligations and how we all play by the same rules and how we uphold international norms. So I think that that's an exactly appropriate thing for him to comment on. And I would take notion with the fact that there's no Russian involvement in Ukraine. Pull the rest of your troops back then. Put your money where your words are. Come on.
The troops are on the Russian side of the border, correct?
There are a number of troops amassed on the Russian side of the border. They've also annexed Crimea, which is part of Ukraine. And the separatists, the pro-Russian separatists, wreaking such havoc right now in the east have a great deal of influence are influenced a great deal by President Putin and by the Russian government. So I think it just defies logic. A lot of things he said in that article do.
And about your sanctions, he said that, like, why?
Because you don't get to break the rules and get away with it. That's not how it works. In 2014, you don't get to annex another country's lands, amass your troops on the border, create instability, which, by the way, he also said something about how Crimea is unstable today because of our actions. Well, Crimea was stable before Russia annexed it. Let's remind people of that. It was calm. This all happened because of what the Russians did. So I think that something that's very important to us, again, is the notion that there are rules. There's international norms, there's international law. And if you break them, there will be consequences. And what you've seen with Russia is the rest of the world united in saying that's not acceptable and that's not okay. And to be fair, there will be further consequences if this action escalates or continues.
Are these sanctions going to affect the deal with China?
The gas deal?
Yeah.
Our sanctions? I don't know how ours would. I mean, you heard the Secretary speak about this in his press avail in Mexico. This is something they've been talking about for a decade. Don't really see it related to this. But I think what you have seen is Russia increasingly isolated from the rest of the international system by our sanctions, by EU sanctions. You really have seen them start to be cut off. And that's not what the Russian people want. That's not what's best for the Russian economy. And we've said if there are further actions, we're looking at other sanctions, including sectoral sanctions.
We have seen them become more isolated. I mean, President Putin just had a huge international conference.
Their economy has become much more isolated. Their credit ranking's gone down.
Right.
They aren't able, their their currency is falling. They aren't able to do business in many places they wanted to be able to do before. Yes, and that will increasingly become the case. Businesses don't want to do business there. They can bring people together for a conference. That doesn't mean people will want to do business with Russia today.
Okay. Well, I mean, that may be the case.
Yeah.
I just don't know. Is there anything you have to back that up?
Well, I think the statistics we've seen from their economic indicators have been increasingly negative since this started.
Right.
So,
well, I mean, I noticed
I haven't seen anything tangible to come out of the St. Petersburg event in terms of changing their economic outlook.
Well, I mean, they just signed an $800 billion gas deal with China.
Right, which they've been talking about for 10 years, and again, doesn't change our assessment of their economic situation.
Right. Okay, but you're not aware if there are news statistics that would show this isolation.
I think we've seen it in the statistics for the last few months. I haven't seen anything otherwise. No.
Right, but what I'm talking about is I haven't heard from, at least from the U.S. government, from you guys or Treasury or the White House, any news. I mean, after the China gas deal went through, I mean, at least Gazprom stock went up.
I don't think it's changed our long-term or medium-term projections about the Russian economy in any way. And I think one thing to keep in mind is in some ways this is a medium-term and long-term game, right? That the Russian economy, the longer sanctions are in place, the more damage they do to your economy. We've seen that other places as well.
Like you're referring to Iran.
In one instance, yeah. So the longer sanctions are in place, the more damage they do, the more isolated you become. We put more on. Other countries put more on. And that's not the direction that we think is best for the Russian economy, but that's their choice to make.
Are you concerned that this gas deal may actually bring the Russian and the Chinese much closer together, and they can actually ally themselves with countries like Iran and other places?
I think that's a really simplistic read of it, Saeed. I think this is something they've been working on for 10 years. It's a business deal, quite frankly. Okay. Russia needs, some of these resources. So I don't think in any way geopolitically or strategically it changes the question you asked right there. Yes, change subject.